Hey everybody, in Module 6 we're going to be looking at transition plans and making sure we're including family and school and outside personnel, including agencies. We'll be talking about how assessment information can be used, and then we'll also be continuing our discussion with these last three objectives about the importance of using supports like peer tutors, volunteers, and instructional assistants or paraprofessionals. Please note that we no longer use the term aid, but always instructional assistant or paraprofessional is appropriate. So in the module, you will be completing your advanced organizer. You'll also be creating an IEP. And for the IEP, note that there are several fantastic videos, if I do say so myself, that walk you through the IEP process. If you haven't already watched these, they have been available for a while in several of our classes. So if you've already watched them, that's fantastic. Know that that foundation is still expected. If you haven't watched them, then I recommend that you go through the IEP PowerPoint videos step by step. It has the specific expectations that we have at Eastern for writing research-based, strength-based IEPs that focus on a student's eligibility. Note that we have a case study. It's in this IEP student scenarios, and you're going to look for Isabella Rosas. Notice that with Isabel, you'll see some present levels information, and you'll also see a sample IEP. When you're looking at that sample IEP, it has some goals in there. You can write better goals. So make sure that you're you could use those as a foundation, but those shouldn't be copied word for word. And know that our goals in Kentucky are based on Kentucky Common Core standards, so you'll make sure that you check the Common Core. In your responses to peers, we're continuing our discussion about peer networks. So make sure that you're sharing great resources and continuing that discussion, sharing your personal experiences if you have some working with peer buddies. And in this module, we've got another bonus opportunity for up to 5 bonus points to continue expanding your live binder that is due in Module 8. And I would highly recommend that you add tabs based on your advanced organizers. What I do a lot of times is take my advanced organizers that are Word documents, I upload them into Google and then get a live link, and I make sure that link is shareable so that I can view it, and then put those in your live binder. You've spent a lot of time and provided a lot of resources and research in your advanced organizers, and I'd recommend saving them in your live binder and sharing them with others. So let's go back up to the advanced organizer and talk about the resources and the research you're going to be doing this week. So the first thing I've given you is a link to a Google folder, and this is kind of foundational to the work that you're doing. So in that Google folder, you're going to see several resources. One of them is an LBD classroom checklist, and the other is an MSD classroom checklist. So depending on with your transition support, you would plan on or currently have students that come and go through a resource room for different periods of the day, and you're providing some collab or some co-teaching support. Or if you have a self-contained classroom, whether that's labeled MSD, whether that's a structured teaching, an autism unit, whatever your district is calling that. If your district is still calling your classroom FMD, please advocate that they change that terminology to MSD. We don't really want anyone to be known as functionally mentally disabled. And I know that the state hasn't completely caught up to us with that eligibility form, but let's move beyond that terminology and change that to an MSD classroom. There's also a walkthrough form that one district has used that kind of gives you an overview idea of what might be expected when an administrator comes through your room, and that expectation is best practices in teaching. I've also given you a sample caseload that you could use to make sure that you're staying up to date. So I'm going to kind of go backwards here with the forms and start with the IEP wrong form with the special ed caseload. So I would recommend for all the students that are on your caseload that you create a form like this where you've got their area of eligibility, because you know you need to have goals in those areas of eligibility. And then to make sure that you're on track with your dates, I would go ahead and add the reeval date. And if this is a reeval date, have I started sending notices? When the ARC is due, and making sure I'm sending out those 3 notices to make sure that I'm following all the due process requirements. Have the educational rights been determined, i.e., do I have the right adult coming to the meeting? Do my goals match the area of eligibility? So making sure that I'm matching there. And then what special ed services are required? Do they have 30 minutes of language arts in a resource room? I need to make sure that I'm providing the services that that student needs. So when I'm looking at a walkthrough form, a lot of people, kind of think of this as a punitive experience, but really you should be looking at a form like this as the best expectations for what my room should look like, and I want to make sure that I meet or exceed these expectations. So, does my classroom provide students with an opportunity for meaningful engagement? Is there a daily opportunity for formative assessment? Do students have an opportunity for accountable talk where they're growing their knowledge? And are there opportunities for collaborative learning within my classroom? Further, do my classrooms have a daily schedule? Are my case management paperwork, is that all up to date? Are my IEPs correct as far as, do I have weekly data collection system that's in place that everyone can access with appropriate authority? So if my principal comes in, if the director of special ed comes in, can they access this data? And is this data confidential? It's not outlying so that anybody that walks in the room, so that peer tutors can see it, so that parents could see it, so that other students could see it. This data needs to be made sure we keep it confidential, but accessible to those with the rights to see it. Is academic data being collected? Do I have all of the right formatting for my goals? Are my students on task? Do they have opportunities to share what they've learned? Do I have lesson plans in place? Is my classroom environment neat? Do I have all of the appropriate supports in place? So I'd really recommend you kind of go through this step by step and see, does my classroom have everything that it should have to properly support my students? The other forms you have, there's one for an LBD or mild to moderate classroom and one for an MSD classroom. And this just step by step says, do I have everything that I need to have? Are my lesson plans ready? Does it list the IEP goals that I'm monitoring? Is my classroom environment set up so the instructional assistants know what to do? Is it clear what instructional strategy is being used? Is my classroom arranged so that students are gaining new skills? I would encourage you to print this out and make sure as you're developing your daily schedule that each part of this is covered and that you could answer each question if a parent asked you questions that were appropriate for a parent to ask about their child, or if an administrator asks you, hey, what's going on in your class, that you could let them know. So this is all foundational to your work in the module. So now let's look at Advanced Organizer 6. And in Advanced Organizer 6, as we look at transition plans, you're going to go through Chapter 9 and look more in depth at transition assessments. And you've got a case study there to look at Joe's transition plan to see what you think about what's been done for Joe. Then the second part, you're going to be looking at training and supporting peer tutors, volunteers, and paraprofessionals. So there's lots of resources in this module to help. One of them talks about volunteer experiences, and this is from PACER, which is a fantastic national resource that gives you some good ideas about students with who could volunteer and also people volunteering in your classroom. There's also a checklist from Bloomington, and this is their annual job responsibilities for an instructional assistant. You might have a totally different form in your district or might have access to different forms, but it does give you a nice idea of things that I, as a teacher where the instructional assistant has been assigned, have I set all this up so that my instructional assistant clearly knows when their lunchtime is, when they're transitioning from one activity to the next. Have I made sure that they've got a schedule for themselves and they also know where all of our students are? Do they have basic information about our students, and do they understand the confidentiality aspects of students with disabilities? Is everything set up? Now in this district, they're looking at third-party billing. I've never done third-party billing, not even sure what that means, but I do know that the documentation my instructional assistants did to support data collection for IEPs, I needed to make sure they knew how to do that, and also how to do some basic student observations. We did training for that. And then made sure that they understood the basics of communications for how to let me know a student was struggling, how I was going to let them know so that I wasn't breaching student confidentiality, making sure that they understood meetings that were upcoming, documentation if we sent home daily logs. All of that needs to be covered. So this is just kind of a primer to help you think through the things that would be specific to your students in your school and your district. You also have access to the Peer Tutoring Resource Center. We've been here once before, but this has some great training manuals from other schools that I'd recommend you look at to see how you can use this information to support your teaching. And there's also an article that I had the privilege of co-writing with some professors from UC and other universities, where we looked at systematically how do we support instructional assistants or paraeducators in classroom settings. This article has lots of resources that you can use, as well as some specific examples of how to develop a shared philosophy, how to set up a schedule, how to do some problem solving in your classroom. So some good resources that should help you. I hope you enjoy working through Advanced Organizer 6 and looking at supporting instructional assistants and working with assessments. If you've got any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to help. Happy learning.